Okay, so now we're at the section called variables. Now this section is going to be quite long. I'm gonna have to probably break this down just on this one section right here, probably two, maybe three videos. And the reason for it is because it's a lot of information here. And if you are not accustomed to programming, you don't know anything about programming, and you're new to this, this is definitely what we call the lifeblood of any programming language, is variables. So I definitely want to make sure you understand this and that you can get somewhat comfortable with what variables are. So again, if you're new to this channel and you're not in the cohort, the link for this book is in the description. It is free. You can follow along. Okay, so now let's get into it. Variables. One of the most powerful features of a programming language is the ability to manipulate variables. We talked about that earlier when we talked about manipulating variables. Now we're about to understand, or data. We were saying manipulating data. So here we're about to understand how we're able to manipulate the data. A variable is a name that refers to a value. Recall that a value is a single specific piece of data, such as a specific number or string variable. All allows us to store values for later use. That is the whole purpose of a variable. We use variables in everything in our programming. Everything goes into a variable. You're going to use a variable for everything. So this is why it's important to understand how we use them. So back to the book, it says a useful visual analogy for how a variable works is that of a label that points to a piece of data. Now, this is where I want to kind of give you more of a visual understanding of what variables are. What I have in my hand here are two boxes. Right here, two boxes. Hope you can see those. Now, they're plain boxes. So visualize these as being variables. They're empty. I can slide one of the slide them open to kind of put content in the boxes like so. So it's an empty box, right? A variable is just a container. Think of it as a container. And so here I have a empty box that represent a variable. I haven't given it a name yet. I haven't decided how I want to use it yet. It's just a plain box. That's what a variable, how it starts off. So as we go further, I'm going to use this visual example so that you will be able to visualize it. Because right now it's kind of hard visualizing what we're doing because it's all about programming. So I just want to use this right here to start off. This is a variable. An empty box is a variable. So let us keep going. So here we say programming language is pointed to JavaScript. I'm going to break that down a little bit more in detail. In this figure, the name programming language points to the string value JavaScript. Notice that it's in quotes. And this pointing to, meaning that it's really, this string is assigned to this variable, is another way of saying it. This is more than an analogy, since it also is representative of how a variable and its value are stored in a computer's memory. With this analogy in mind, let's look at how we can formally create variables in JavaScript. So here we go. Declaring and initializing variables with let. Now, we're going to go deeper into this later on, but let me kind of break it down to you really quick. We're using the variable let, lowercase let. It's a reserved keyword. You can't use it as a variable name. And it's a reserved keyword. We have three of them. We have var, var, and let and const, C-O-N-S-T. We'll kind of break those down, but we're going to focus on let for right now. You're not going to see var in any programming languages up to this day. It's an old way of how we used to do things. if you run into var, it's either legacy code when you see it, or maybe somebody created an express server using var. But there's really no need to use var, and we'll explain later on what it is, because var has this thing where it can be hoisted, and we'll talk more about hoisting later on. But first, we want to understand about declaring and initializing variables with let. It says to create a variable in JavaScript, create a new name for the variable and proceed it with the keyword let. So here we have an example. Now, this is what declaring a variable is. I want you to understand that. Now, there's a difference here. When we say declaring a variable, we use let. When we're declaring a variable, we're just giving it let, the keyword, the name, and a semicolon. That's all declaring a variable is. But then when we say and initializing a value, then we have to give it a value or give it something like a string, a number. So let's go back to our empty box example here, just so you can see this. Right now, this is what I would consider a let. It's empty right now, and then I want to go ahead and write a name on here. As you can see, we said programming language right here. If we said programming language, we want our variables to be descriptive, because remember, high level means it's human readable. I can read that. I see as a programmer that this variable is going to be holding the programming language. Now notice programming language is singular. It's not plural. It didn't say programming languages. It says programming language. So I'm expecting it to just be one string or one language like JavaScript, as we're going to show here in the example. But understand, JavaScript is dynamic. I can call it programming language and give it 7 different languages if I wanted to, make an array of languages. But that's not descriptive. That's misleading to me as a programmer. When I go in to work on this code, I'm expecting to just have a singular string, not an array of something or a whole bunch of strings. I'm just looking for one string or one programming language, which would be an example of JavaScript. But for the compiler, it doesn't see any of that. That's proper syntax. If I did put an array of different languages in there, it wouldn't throw me an error, but that would be a logic error, because it wouldn't give me the result in the end that I'm looking for. And we're going to explain that as we go further on in the course. So here it says this creates a variable named programming language. The act of creating a variable is referred to as a variable declaration, or simply declaration. So again, when I'm declaring a variable or a declaration of a variable, all I'm just doing is giving it the name. I'm not giving it a value. I'm not initializing. And the reason for that is because something globally, we use it as a global example. I may declare this variable on a global level because I don't know what I want to use it for. I may want to change it up in different functions, but globally I have access to that variable. But we'll talk about scope later. That's all about scoping. But first, let's get an understanding of what a declaring a variable is, as opposed to declaring and initializing one. So once a variable has been declared, it may be given a value using an assignment statement, which uses an equal sign to give a variable a value. So here we have an example here. This right here is, when you're new to programming, this throws you off, because we technically want you to not call the equal sign an equal sign in JavaScript. We want you to call it an assignment operator. Remember the example, we said that programming is pointing to JavaScript, or we could say JavaScript is assigned to programming language. Well, that equal sign is the assignment operator. It gives the assignment to the particular variable. So who would be the assignment operator in this case? I would be, because here I have this box and I want to be able to put something in the box. So what I want to do, I'm going to assign this cloth to this box, which is my variable. And inside my this variable box, I'm just going to call it cloth, because I only have one cloth in there. And now it's closed. But because it's a let, I can open it back up and I can change it. And we're going to deal with const so we can get a visual what the difference is between let and const. But right now, this is a variable that has a cloth in it, and I know that it's a cloth in there because I wrote cloth on it. But when I close it up, I can't see what's on the inside. So I'm believing that a cloth is inside of this box. So that, like I said, when it has to make sense, because what if it was multiple cloths in this box? Then this would be misleading to me. So if I was working in a factory or a warehouse that was putting items into a box, and I know I was supposed to only put one cloth in it, but it had cloths on it, I'll be looking for more than one cloth, or it'll say 5 cloths. But if it just says cloth and it has 4 or 5 cloths in it, then that's going to be misleading to me. So make sure your variables are descriptive, and it has to be lowercase. So if you have multiple words, the second word would be uppercase, which we would call camel case, and we'll get into that in a moment. But notice it's lowercase. So that's the convention. Your variable should be lowercase. It shouldn't be capital. The first letter should not be capitalized. But when we get into constants, there's a different protocol that we use, and I'll explain that when we get to it. Now, the act of assigning a variable to a value for the first time is called initializing. So right here, I just declared the variable programming. It's just declared. And then later on, I passed it a value, which I initialized it. Noticed here, I did not use let again. You only have to declare it once with let. Once it's been declared, you don't have to declare it again if you're using it in the same scope. Now, understand something. If you do that, if you try to declare the same variable in the same scope twice, you're going to get an error. And I'll show that to you when we get to that point. Now, the first line creates a variable that does not yet have a value. The variable is a label that does not point to any data. So right now we just have programming language. Now the second line is when we will point to some data, meaning we're going to assign some data to this particular variable. The second line assigns the variable a value, which connects the name to the given piece of data. So now JavaScript is or programming language is pointed to JavaScript, or JavaScript is assigned to programming language, depending on how you want to say it. It is possible to declare and initialize a variable with a single line of code. This is the most common way to create a variable. We can do it all in one line. So let me break this down. Pay attention to what I'm asking you to do, or if we ask you to do something. If we say just declare the variable, declare me a variable for a car, we just want you to put the keyword, the word car, and then we want the semicolon. That's it. But if we say declare a variable car and initialize it with different cars, or a car name, then that's when you add a value. So know the terminology. It's so important that you learn terminology and get good at terminology. I used to struggle with that when I first started, and I would get called out a lot on that in the beginning, because in my mind I knew what I was saying, but to someone else it didn't make sense. So you have to understand the terminology. Now, warning, you will see some programmers use var to create a variable in JavaScript like this. While this is valid syntax, you should not like I was saying earlier, you should not use var to declare a variable. Using var is old JavaScript syntax, and it differs from let in important ways that we will learn about later. When we see examples using var, use let instead. We definitely are going to use let. You're never going to use, well, I ain't gonna say never. It's bad practice to use var, and like I said, I'll explain later. To give a variable a value, use the assignment operator. The equal sign is called an assignment operator. If I hear you call it an equal sign, I'm going to correct you and say assignment operator, because I want you to get into the habit of calling it what it is in this context. Stay within this context. So get used to calling it equal sign an assignment operator, because when it comes down to assigning equal to a value, you're not going to use the assignment operator. You're going to use double equal or triple equal, and we'll explain that as the course goes on. This operator should not be confused with the concept of equality, which expresses whether two things are the same. We will see later that equality uses the triple equal operator. The assignment statement links a name on the left-hand side of the operator with a value on the right-hand side. This is why you will get an error if you try to run this syntax. This is invalid syntax. This will not work. You always have to put the variable on the left side and the value on the right side of the assignment operator. That's why you can't call it an equal sign, because equality, the double equal signs and the triple equal sign, those are for comparing things, and we'll explain when we get into comparisons. Now, the assignment statement must have the name on the left-hand side and the value on the right-hand side. To avoid confusion when reading or writing code, say to yourself, program language is assigned JavaScript, or programming language gets the value JavaScript. Don't say programming language equals JavaScript. Warning. What if by mistake you leave off let when declaring a variable? Contrary to what you might expect, JavaScript would not complain or throw an error. In fact, creating a variable with let is valid syntax. Without let is a valid syntax, but it results in very different behavior. Such a variable will be a global variable, which we will discuss later. The main point to keep in mind for now is that you should always use let unless you have a specific reason not to do so. Okay, I'm going to stop the video here, and I'm going to pick up in the next video for evaluating variables. Give you a little break, especially if I'm starting to lose you here. I definitely want to give you a break because this video has gone on a little long. So what we're going to do is go to the next one, finish up this evaluating variables in the next video. So remember, the more you do, the more you improve. So bookmark this video and continue to go back and use it as a reference. Okay, see you in the next video.